everyone. I'm starting my podcast again, and here I am in my room in my flat in Galashiels, which is a location, small town in the borders of Scotland, and it's the location of Heriot-Watt University, which is where I'm doing my Masters in Knitwear for the next 12 months. So I can't really put anything exciting on my walls, and I don't really have a better place to put you, so I think this podcast will mostly be coming from where I'm sitting on my bed, but hopefully it won't matter that the wall is beige and bland and I don't have pretty shelves of yarn around me, because hopefully I'm going to just be able to show you lots of amazing stuff from my program and have a bit of a visual and auditory, I suppose, record of my year in this program, as much for me as it is for anyone who might be interested in watching. So I have podcasted before. I put up a few episodes on this channel. Feel free to go back and have a look. They're mostly about my hand knitting. I filmed when I was back in Montreal, where I lived for 8 years. And I found with that I felt like I wasn't bringing much more interesting to the podcast. I was just talking about what I was knitting and yarn, and a little bit about when I was working at my local yarn store, Espace Tricot. But I feel that now I'm in this program, I have a bit more to offer of interest in a podcast, and as I said, I want to keep a guide of my own process too. So today is really just a bit of an introduction to that. I've started my intro week for the program, but classes don't start till Monday, and it's just incredible. I put up a lot of photos. I was going to say snaps, but it's Instagram, so I guess they're not snaps, but check out my Instagram stories. I'm on there as Knit the Sundown, all one word. And I put up a lot of just photos from around the campus there. The textiles facilities are mostly in an old mill, which is this beautiful red brick building, cavernous high ceilings, amazing windows and light. It's just the best location. And there's a weave shed described as the biggest weave shed in Europe, if not the world. I wonder if anyone's going to challenge me on that, but it is enormous, full of dobby looms. Dobby looms? I'm not a weaver. I'm not going to get into that, but it's an incredible room. And they also have production looms and a massive knit shed with industrial and domestic machines and linkers. And I hope they have tubular knitting machines, but I didn't get a good look. To my untrained, currently, not for long I hope, linkers can look, I think they look a bit like tubular knitting machines. Please correct me on that if I'm wrong. I'm just sort of see these sort of drum-shaped machines and I assume, oh, they may be linkers, they may be tubular knitting machines that go in the round. So I'll find out about that. And the library, oh my goodness, it's just incredible. Back in my good old stomping ground, 746.43 and 746.44. Those are the knitting and crochet textile sections for hand knits. Industrial knits are in 346, I think, if you know your Dewey Decimal Systems. Anyway, if you're ever in a public library and you want to find the knitting, head straight to 746. That's where they are. So I've got a reading list and I'm just delving into that. It's so exciting, just inspiration books as well as manuals. And so that gave me an idea for one of the sections that I'm going to have as a feature on this podcast, the Fibrary. I thought that was a clever name. The Fibrary will be where I review what I'm reading that week and give you a little overview, and I'll do hand knitting and pattern books that I have, as well as machine knitting books and inspiration books, because I know a lot of the people watching this may not be doing machine knitting, but I hope to be bringing hand knitting, which is really my passion and has been my long-time skill, into the program as well. So in that vein, I have a couple of examples today. My brother sent me this for my birthday last year. It's fabulous. It's by a guy I want to research more, James Norbury. This is a penguin knitting book. Aww, I just noticed my brother got it stamped. It's from when he was working at Shakespeare & Co. In Paris. So this is a book of patterns. As a book of patterns, it's not very practical. You can see I haven't broken the spine because I'm not a demon. And it's not that practical for having open in front of you for patterns, but they're gorgeous vintage patterns, and just to read the style of old style magazine patterns is just so much fun and educational. And they're just fascinating photos, like this lovely poodle. I'm not sure if that dog jumper is in this book actually. I have to have a look. And some interesting lace and cables here and stripes. I love the styling of it all. So that's just as a glimpse into that. It's fascinating. But he's also got this introduction that I need to read more into about a little bit of history of knitting. I think we've learned a lot more about the history of knitting and the context of knitting since this was first published in 1957, but it's still fascinating as a sign of the times. And James Norbury himself, I believe, did shows about knitting on the BBC, so those would be fascinating to find. I love, on Instagram, there are a few of them, and YouTube as well, of course, the old Pathé documentaries about, often they went into factories for various amazing things, like painting doll faces, or making guitars, or making plates, and just fascinating sort of mid-century factory work. And some of them are textile based as well, so I imagine it's sort of being in that type of video, of movie rather, although about hand knitting. So this is something I want to get more into, and I'll come back to it once I have as a review. But already I think it's a paperback. It's not expensive. It's a reprint. If you're interested at all in vintage patterns and vintage views on knitting, it's got this fantastic Stittionary as well. These cute little things. It's fascinating. I love dipping into it already, even though I haven't read it cover to cover. And then I have here a couple books, not to stay on books for too long, but I have here 2 of the books that I'm starting with from my reading list, mostly because they were the lightest ones to put in my bag. Just a lot of these for inspiration more than manuals, so I'm going to save my knitting machine manuals for when I'm actually on the machines. But it still has basically the anatomy of a knitting machine, and then sort of more design work as well. So I'm going to read through that, and I may come back to it if I think you guys would be interested in me reviewing it. It's got all sorts of sections as well on industry, like trend forecasting and production and finishing and that sort of thing. And then this rather dry looking book, Knitted Clothing Technology by Terry Brackenbury. And this is much more sort of technical manual of machine knitting. Sort of construction of a collar and that sort of thing. But I love the diagrams in these books, just because even though it's sort of a dry manual, just because it's about knitting, it's more exciting. So that's going to be something to get into as well. I don't know if I'm going to review this for you. I think it's might be rather dry, but and more machine related, but there we go. So that's sort of a bit of a look into what I'll be, one of the things I'd like to cover on this podcast, as well as things I learn in my lectures and my own progress through my sketchbooks and workbooks, as well as my hand knitting projects, which I hope to continue with. I'm wearing one now, as I think you can tell. This is my finished boxy sweater by Jorge Locatelli, but I did a lot of the modifications that various users on Ravelry have posted for petite sizing. I cast on fewer stitches from the extra small size, which meant reducing the short rows on the shoulders, and I think the neckline ended up being pretty much to the pattern, but after about here I sort of had to improvise ditto with the arms. But I love how it turned out, and and I'm not always one to follow for pattern editing, because I'm very bad at taking notes of what I do to edit them, and generally once I've made a pattern I don't go back and make it again. So that's also something that I hope to get better at through this program, because we have to be very rigorous about plotting our development and our technique. So I think that'll help me as a hand knitter as well, to keep track of projects and modifications that I make. I have here also my sketchbook. This is sort of more with, oh, got caught in my ring there. These are more things that I tried when I had a machine back at home in Montreal. I got my colourwork carriage going one time. That was a lot of fun. And I got my lace carriage going, but I think I just made mistakes because this isn't much of anything really. But there are definitely, the way this program seems to work will be making samples and samples and samples and samples before actually getting into knitting anything. So, I'm looking back on all of these. That was sort of a fun little stitch pattern I managed to get done just by manipulating the needles on the carriage on the bed manually. I don't really know the names very well for these in English because I took a course in French and I don't remember the bits of the machine in English as well as I do in French. This is another fun thing you can do on a machine without a rib carriage, which you need to purl is hard on the machine, so you need a separate type of carriage for it, but there's a way to do. I learned that the English is mock rib. I just called it a false cuff after my French lessons, but there's a way of manipulating the needle so you can get a rib effect for a cuff without needing a rib carriage or a purl function. So I'm just sort of remembering all these things now. Just various notes I've put aside. Don't ramble, don't mumble. Got to keep my head on straight. If I'm just talking to myself, I just go and go and go. So I don't really have much else in the way of program related stuff today, but I do want to go through 2 works in progress. And also talk about these project bags, which I think I haven't mentioned on podcasts before because I haven't been podcasting in a long time. This one was lovingly custom made for me. I had this Liberty fabric. This one was made by Lindsay Hagen. She's on Instagram at Lindsay, Linsy, Hagen, Hagen, and Oh Boy Handmade is her brand. She has an Etsy store. Lovely, lovely bags. She uses lovely fabrics and they're very well sewn, very well finished. I would say that if you like a very stiff interfacing in your bags, that you want them very boxy and to keep their shape when you plonk them on the table, these are not floppy, but they may not have the stiffness you want if you prefer that sort of boxy shape holding bag. I love floppy bags so you can just stuff into anything. And this does hold its shape, as you can see. I've got it propped up on my bed here and it's not falling over. But it doesn't have the same sort of structure and weight to it as, say, the Field Bag by Fringe Company, which I also have and I love. So in here is my striped study shawl, and I'm knitting this with, I very much modified it from the colour scheme in the original pattern. This is with the fade kit that I got from Riverside Studios, a Quebec-based indie dyer. And so I can't really show you how wide it is because these needles are 32 inch, but because of the short row shaping once it's asymmetrical. Now, also because of the short row shaping and because of the modifications I did with the colours, basically this side is very much shorter than this side. I am onto the straight edge section now at the end, so I think that will rectify itself. Either way, it'll just be asymmetric is what I'm going for, and it's already clearly very wide enough to get around my neck, so I'm happy with that. I'll see what it's like bound off. It may end up being a little bit more like a deep kerchief, but we'll see. And I also have a test knit that I'm very much enjoying. This is coming out soon. This is for Flossy Knits on Ravelry. So this is a broad, sort of more almost scarf-like shawl. It's a bit wider in the middle. I'm halfway through a row, so I can't even show it out. This is a medium size. It's going to be wider with the end at the end with the cream border, but it's not going to be a deep V. It's a sort of crescent shape, and then the border itself doesn't have any increases, so it ends up being almost flat, almost as wide as equally wide across. But I think the gentle curve to it will be very elegant. And it has a stitch pattern in it that I just love. Now, I did my left twists. I put my needle in a different way to what was intended, so my twists don't quite, certain strands don't come out quite as strongly, but I still really like this effect. It's been a while since I've done anything with an all over stitch pattern, just with knits and purls, so that's been fun too, because I've just been doing endless stockinette for ages, or garter, between that shawl and this jumper. So it took me a little while to get the pattern into my head, but it does happen, and it's really fun if you want to play around with texture. And now this section will have bubbles on it, and I found a slight miscount in the pattern, and Flossie Knits Claire was absolutely receptive. She was brilliant. She was like, oh, she sent me the corrected pattern straight away. It was just sort of one stitch over it needed to meet the stitch count. So that was, it's been a really great experience working with her as a test knitter, which I haven't done a whole lot of. I've done some, and she's just been absolutely brilliant to collaborate with. So that's been a great experience, and her pattern basically needs nothing done to it. It was very good to begin with, of course. So I'm excited to finish that. I have a few coats this winter that it will go with, so that's lovely. And the wool I'm using for that is a wool and linen blend from Isaga, which I was really excited to find because I've never knit with Isaga yarns. I haven't found them in stores in North America, so I'm really excited to be back in the UK and trying different brands, and hers is one of them. So this is the Marilyn. Oh, I'll grab the label. The pattern itself is written for Blacker Yarns, Lioness, I believe, which is a 50-50 wool and linen. I couldn't find that at my local yarn store in Oxford, and I didn't have much luck ordering it online, so I went for this blend instead, and I think the linen in it still is noticeable. So I used a cream colour and a blue colour. The colours don't have names. I think the cream was colour 0, and I'm not sure what the pale blue was. I got it at Oxford Yarn Store in my hometown, and it just so happened that the colours I chose are very similar to her original test sample, but I'm happy with that too. Don't have anything pale blue, and I think it suits me. Oh, it'll go nicely with this jumper too. So that's that. That's a couple works in progress. I actually don't have a jumper on the needles right now, although I did get the wool from my soiree pullover from Pom Pom 21 in the mail, finally, from Espace Tricot. It got sent to my dad's, and I'd already left, so he had to send it up to where I've moved. So that was a delay there. And I'm really excited to start that because I need to finish it in time for my cousin's wedding at the end of October, which I'm so excited about because I'm coming back to Toronto and then Rochester, New York for like 3 days. I leave Edinburgh Saturday and come back on Tuesday afternoon. It's going to be such a whirlwind, but I think it'll be exciting, and I'm really looking forward to showing off my soiree pullover at a lovely wedding for 2 lovely people. So, and I think it's perfectly acceptable to wear a jumper to a wedding when it is silk and mohair and cables and luxury. So I'm excited about that, and I'll show you once I've cast it on. I think I'm going to wrap up there. It's already been almost 20 minutes. And basically I'll have more for you once the flurry of first classes have started. I'm expecting probably to have time to podcast on Thursday or Friday, so hopefully put something up for the weekend every now and then. Maybe, we'll see, every 1 to 2 weeks probably. And I don't know how much longer than this they'll go, mostly because my computer can't really handle processing bigger files than this, but that also helps to keep me restrained in my ramblings, so I'm going to cut it off there. I would love to hear from you if you've enjoyed this podcast, if there's anything in particular from the programme that you want to see, and please let me know in the comments. And in the meantime, catch me on Instagram at knitthesundown, and have a look in the comments for things that I've mentioned in this podcast. and I hope to see you next time.